I want to say a big thank you to everybody who submitted stories that I narrated today. If you have a story you'd like to hear me narrate, then make sure you send it to my email. I'm currently making a Reddit page so you can submit there, but I'm just having trouble setting up the account and getting it verified, but it's on the way. I hope you all enjoy these stories and have a great day. I'll talk to you all soon. This happened when I was a teenager, and it still makes me shiver when I think about it. During the early 90s, I used to camp in Wicklow Mountains quite often. For those of you who don't know, Wicklow is quite a large national park on the outskirts of Dublin, Ireland. It's not huge by international standards, but it is big. I mean, big enough to get lost in. Bodies are unearthed from there from time to time, often as a result of a drug deal gone wrong, or because of a family dispute. Without specific information, there is no way that the police could find a missing person in all of those acres of pine forest. In 2017, an army search team found the scattered remains of a person at 8 locations along an isolated 20-kilometer stretch of road running through the mountains. A power tool had been used to dismember the body. Other people have gone missing after they accepted lifts from strangers, never to be seen alive again. Anyway, back to the story. During the summer, me and a group of school friends used to head off into the woods. When the weather was very warm, we even made our own tents out of pine branches slung across a frame. We never had trouble from the locals. That was, of course, apart from the summer of '92. I was with a group of inner city lads who were a little tougher than my other friends. As if the location was not scary enough, the place where we set up our camp was called the Devil's Glen. It was a heavily wooded area with some broad-leaf trees, but there's quite a lot of campfires. It gets very dark once you get into the woods. You also get a lot of deer up there. They can be a hazard to traffic, but you don't really meet anyone. I mean, apart from loggers or the occasional day trippers. It's pretty isolated. We had tents with us, but none of us were properly equipped for the outdoors. After we set up camp, we decided to visit the local town, really just a couple of shops along a main road, and on our way back, some of the gang stole lighter fluid so we can get a fire going. That night, we drank ciders in the woods around a roaring fire as night drew. It begins to rain, lightly at first, but then more heavier. I remembered lying on the ground outside of my tent because I'm a bit drunk. Just then, I can hear what sounds like monks chant far off into the trees. The forest closed in all around us, in all directions. We can't figure out where the chanting's coming from. It sounded exactly like the Georgian chant, but there's something very unsettling about it. Something evil. And we start getting very scared. We're just a group of kids from the inner city, and this is before mobile phones. The sound gets closer. At one point, it sounded as though it's surrounding us. I remember my brother screaming to me, who was with us, panicking, "Get him back inside now," dragging me inside. The lads stamped down the fire. A hush now falls over the campsite. At first, we begin to hear what sounds like muffled footsteps approaching. They're very difficult to make out because of the soft pine needles surrounding us, and given the noise we made earlier, they probably didn't belong to animals. Eventually, it's very obvious to all of us what's going on. In the darkness, we could just about make out the shapes of people silently filing past our campsite before they vanish into the trees. The following morning, we set out to investigate. Our walks led us onto a little used tar road near the camp. Scrawled into the surface are pentagrams and other symbols of devil worship. Needless to say, we get out of there. The following year, some of the group go back, including my brother. They get chased out of the woods by men with dogs, and they end up having to walk back to Dublin. Just a few years after our camping trip, a shocking story about Devil's Glen made it into the newspaper. A girl had been handcuffed to a tree and assaulted by a group of men. She was only freed when her cries were heard by locals. Another middle-aged man was abducted, spending 4 days tied to a tree. When he was eventually found, he was close to death. He even spent time in intensive care. Afterwards, the newspapers carried the stories with headlines like, "The mountains where no one will hear you scream." To be honest, given the number of people that have gone missing in the Wicklow Mountains, I now think we were all very lucky. What probably saved us that night in '92 is that we're in a large group. I shudder to think what might have happened had I been there alone. I still have no idea what's going on in the Devil's Glen. I hope I never find out. So this happened to a couple of friends and me about 6 years ago. The first summer, we're all back from college. We'd been hooligan kids who gotten into weed a little in college. We decided to go to the state park near one of my friend's houses late at night to smoke. For the sake of the story, I'll give you a layout. We parked at the end of this dead end on a wooded road where a path started that led into the park from the back. The park is heavily wooded, with a lake and some recreational areas on the side with the main entrance. The path we're on went parallel to the edge of a large field, with a couple of yards of trees between. A little ways down there was a small gap to access the field. We had stopped in the big field next to the tree line near the gap that led back to the path we walked on. There was a rock there, and my friend began to use it to prepare the fun stuff. It was a really cloudy night, and the only things we could see were what lit up with our phones. After a couple of minutes, we hear something moving in the trees, maybe 30 feet away. I've always been overly paranoid and insisted that the worst is gonna happen, but my friend said it's a squirrel. A minute later, we hear it again, closer and louder. I say sounds kinda heavy, you think it's a deer, more to calm myself down. Maybe, one of them says. That's when the sound picks up. We all froze, put our lights away. We had all grown up in wooded areas and spent a lot of time hiking and whatever else. We know it sounds like when someone is walking in the woods, or what that should sound like. If it was a person, they were walking slow, and they're way closer than I would have preferred, walking in an unnatural manner. That's already got to me. What animal would walk towards people, not away from them? I get a surge of anxiety and kind of blurted out it sounds like a person. On cue, Whoever it was starts running at us through the trees, and one of my friends yells at us to run. We do. We all start running full speed across the tall field of grass, and the whole time we hear the guy running behind us. A minute of running brought us all to a tall rock that's there to prevent the floor from flooding, and began to climb furiously, tripping and scrambling over the rocks to the other side, and run into the woods that ran next to the road we're parked on. We got a little way in, sat in the dark together, absolutely still and silent. We hear nothing though, but don't break our silence or move a muscle for about half an hour. Then we creep through the edge of the road, unfortunately a ways past my friend's car. After 5 more minutes of building the courage, we ran. We waited for my friend to unlock his door so he could unlock the back one and got the heck out of there. However, when my friend began to pack up, and his headlights lit a little way into the path in front of us, we caught a shadow figure of somebody walking right back down that path. So it's now confirmed that it was no squirrel or animal that chased us. It was someone, and God knows what their intentions were. I hate the fact that they're on their own, and there's a group of us, and they're completely unfazed by the numbers difference. Clearly they had bad intentions, whoever they were. I'm just glad that I didn't have to find out for myself firsthand. This isn't my story, but it happened to my friend. Let's call him John, for anonymity purposes. He's a big hunter. This happened in his backyard yesterday. He has a pretty big backyard, and it has a small lake that's of decent size. At the edge of his yard is where the forest begins, and about 50 yards in, he hunts deer, and naturally, he has a deer set up. He was on vacation for a football championship when he came home yesterday and was checking the camera. He was scrolling through and it was deer, deer and more deer. Then a little girl. The girl had her head down and was holding a doll. She had a big coat on and you couldn't see her face, but she was facing the camera. In the next picture, her forehead was up against the top of the camera and she's just staring into it. She had big brown eyes, literally just staring. In the photo after that, it was the same little girl again, but this time, there was an older man. Not old, but maybe middle-aged. He was holding a shovel and what appears to be an axe, looking at the camera with the girl. Then the pictures ended. Those are the last ones. I will update if I get more information, but he said this just happened to him yesterday night. I really hope there's no bad news to come from this. I used to be part of search and rescue for Parks Canada, but that all changed after something I experienced in the foothills 3 years ago. The horror I witnessed truly contrasted the beauty of the surrounding primal landscape. There is something special about this land which is difficult to explain. It's so peaceful. This whole area was considered to be a sacred place by the Aboriginal people. The area is predominantly inhabited by the mighty buffalo, grizzly bears, wolves and mountain lions, among other prestigious animals. But there is something else that inhabits this land, something that has gone unseen for an incomprehensible amount of time. Dare I say that this thing must have witnessed a millennial go by. For all intents and purposes, I call it a vampire. I don't mean a Wendigo, And I don't mean a pale man with slick back hair and a black cape with an Eastern European accent. In a way, this thing seemed like a force that has gone unseen in the wilderness, feeding off the unwary travellers. What it does to its prey is not unlike anything I've ever seen before in nature. It's worse. It feeds like a parasite to continue its existence. This, of course, is me trying to make some kind of sense of what I've witnessed, to have some kind of grasp on the situation, to keep things in order. That year was chaos due to severe electrical storms that caused multiple forest fires, some of which were under control, while others caused massive damage in other areas. Health advisory services were recommended anyone with existing health issues to remain indoors and avoid all strenuous activity. But even that didn't keep the most rugged or most determined outdoorsy men away. Oftentimes, the sky was hazy, with billowing smoke that went on for miles and miles being carried by the wind. There were also fire bans put in place. Anyone caught with a fire at a campsite, or even a fire pit in their backyard, could get a massive fine. Let me tell you about that day. Normally, it would have been a bright sunny day, typical of the season during that time of year. However, the sunlight was blotted out by the heavy smoke that arrived downwards. The trouble started during the middle of the summer that year when a park ranger came across a reserved campsite that was in ruins. There was debris scattered all around the site. The tents had been shredded open, and one was even completely collapsed. The car windows were smashed in, the roof had been torn open. The wreckage clearly showed that some kind of struggle had gone on there during the night. As it turned out, there was a family of 4 that had been using the campsite. It was a father and mother with 2 daughters. The ranger determined that it was likely a bear attack. He called in for backup. The RT and P were called in to the scene alongside search and rescue teams, and a massive search and rescue for the family was commenced. The group I was with was about 10 miles south away from the campsite. This is how far out the scent dogs brought us, but still, there's zero sign of the family at all. How in the hell did we come all this way without finding anything? I mean, no blood, no objects, not even clothing. Heck, there weren't even any footprints in the dirt besides deer tracks. The area we ended up in was thick brush, dominated by boarding spruce trees and rocky cliffs. The canines began acting up, but they began whining and howling with fright, tucking their tails in between their legs, even hiding behind the dog handlers trying to control them. This is highly unusual. It's like they either saw or caught sense of something they didn't like. But what was it? I saw several meters behind the group, some people who were arguing about the dogs and which direction to go in. I kept glancing around because I felt anxious. Despite the summer heat, I had that strange sensation of someone walking over my grave. Do you know what I mean? My body shivering, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up on end, and goosebumps formed on my skin. There's another feeling too, the distinct feeling of being watched. I spun around looking in every direction, looking at the trees and rocks, but there was nothing of note to see. What happened next I cannot truly explain. It was against procedure, but I felt compelled to start moving towards an overgrown hiking trail in the southeast. I felt like I was being pulled by some unseen force. I just felt the need. Maybe I wanted to get away from the search and rescue members who were arguing over the tracking dogs going wild. Beyond the thick brush, I discovered a cave entrance in the ground. At the cave mouth, I spotted something bright. It was a child's-sized shoe, with pink stripes on the side of it. I felt my heart sink to my chest. I looked up at the smoky sky and let out a sigh. I noticed an opening in the dark hazy sky, and a beam of sunlight hit me. I snapped out of it and grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the ground. The sloping ground showed signs of something being dragged downwards. I let out a whimper as I entered the cave. I knew there was something in there. I knew there were caves here, but I had never entered alone. But, as I stated, I felt like something was calling me. This is something I still can't describe to this day. I had to crab walk through the entrance, but when I reached the flat ground, I could finally stand upright. 20 feet into the cave, the stagnant air took a hold of the darkness, which was becoming oppressive, but I continued pushing downwards. I stopped and listened very carefully. There was complete silence in the unforgiving darkness. I shined the light down around the cavern and spotted something on the wall. It's an ancient petroglyph carved into the wall. I've never seen that before. It depicted men chasing a buffalo herd off a cliff. I tranced my finger along the primitive art. Pushing onwards into the unknown, I found an object on the cavern floor. It was what appeared to be a very old leather canvas bag. I picked it up and blew the dust off of it. I unbuck it and take a look inside. There's a rusty water canteen, a bronze compass, a leather-bound book, and to my surprise, a very old-looking pistol. I dropped to my knees and grabbed the book out of the bag. The writing on the cover read, "Le Demon." I remained still on my knees, trying to comprehend what I was seeing, trying to make sense when a noise startled me. It didn't sound like it was right next to me, but rather it came from somewhere deeper in the cave. It sounded like something being broken or snapped. I continued my search for the missing family. They had to be down there. The glow of the flashlight showed that I had to make my way down another slope. But at the bottom, I saw something that causes me to freeze. I saw a pair of feet, one barefoot, one missing a shoe. The other was wearing a white shoe with pink stripes. Tears begin to well up in my eyes, and complete sadness has taken over. I had indeed found one of the missing family members, a young girl that couldn't have been older than mine. I gasped in horror of what I saw. First was the look of complete terror frozen onto her face. Those were horrible wounds on her necks and arms. She's completely pale, as all the life and blood has been drained from her. My heart was beating like a jackhammer. I began having difficulty breathing. I began to shake. My fingers are numb. There was more damage than just what appeared to be bite marks. Her head's at a weird angle. The cold indifference of the universe blasted in my mind, and I began to cry uncontrollably. I frantically reached for the only thing I could use to defend myself, something that works against animals, my flare gun. If there was some kind of animal down there, I knew I could scare it at least, I think. A shuffling sound caused me to back up against a tunnel wall. There was something in there with me. Nausea began to take a hold of me, and my mind felt as though it was swirling. I was feeling cold, but Sweat was running down my face, turning the opposite. With my hands trembling, I summoned the courage I have to move the flashlight to the direction of the source of sound, my sanity now holding on for dear life. And when I saw the thing, I thought I was gonna die right on the spot. The very sight of the being, the very knowledge that this creature exists, reaches straight into the deepest depths of my psyche, right down into the primal fear that exists in all living things. I wanted to retreat, but I couldn't. This is what I saw in that dark cave system. Have you ever read a National Geographic magazine or watched a Discovery Channel? If you have, you are probably familiar with Otzi the Iceman, the man whose frozen corpse was found in a glacier, having been there for thousands of years in the Alps. This is what I could compare this being to. Its leathery discoloured skin was pulled tight to its skeletal frame. The mouth is filled with yellow teeth. In fact, its mouth and chest are smeared in blood. The thing's not even looking at me. It was crouched on the top of the bodies that belonged to the rest of the missing family. The mother and daughter had their throats torn apart. On top of the pile directly beneath the creature was the father. Its eyes are closed. I'm really not sure if I'm dreaming now. It now emits a strange sound while slowly turning its head towards me. Its eyes snapped open. The eyes appear pure black, probably because of the darkness. This thing just appears to be an ancient vampire, but it can't be true. Strange thoughts race through my mind, like, where did it come from? Am I having stress-induced psychosis, or is this actually here? In my mind, I'm starting to slip, as it began to stand upright and continue towards me, continuing to make the strange sound. The flare gun. I point directly at it, pulling the trigger. There's a very loud bang and the entire cave is lit up. It's honestly nearly blinding and deafening simultaneously. This thing is gonna kill me. I start running as fast as I could. My body was scraping against the cavern walls. I could see daylight just ahead of the cave entrance. I crawled up it as fast as I could, pushing my body to its limits. I spilled out onto the surface area, facing a bright blue sunny sky. The smoke had finally cleared, at least for now. The spruce trees gently swayed in the wind overhead. I clumsily get up onto my feet and backed away from the entrance to the cave. The creature never emerges from the darkness. I could just make out a set of glowing red orbs from the darkness. I know it's that creature. The rest of the team hurried through the brush to come and find me in shock. I told them I found the family down there. I told them what was down there, and armed policemen and park rangers went down there to get the remains of the family, but there's no signs of what killed them. I quit the very next day. No one believed me. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me was when I was 14 and camping with some of my friends. I was camping in my own tent. I went to a military store and got a really cool US Army tent with a big star on the side of it. Man, I loved that thing, but I digress. So we're out in a national park near where we all live. I'm a bit away from my friends. Now, as I'm sleeping, I'm awoken by the sound of rustling. Just as I'm about to get up to investigate what's happening, I see the silhouette of a man and I drop down. Now, stupid for me, I have a screen open and I can see through it. I get the fright of my life as this homeless looking person presses his face right up against the screen. He then screams at the absolute top of his lungs and runs off. What's worse is my friends don't believe me and think it's me playing a prank on them. I ended up digging a hole and sleeping half underground because I was so terrified he'd come back. Josie Twyman. Hi, I'm in Minal. You might not believe this. I'm shaking and sweating just typing this. For a while, after I moved out from my parents, I lived in a cabin right by the Dixie National Forest where there's endless acres of land. I spent most of my free time fishing, hiking, and my favourite thing to do is to get lost in the woods and find my way back by sundown. I have a habit of following animal tracks, but that led me to this tragedy. It was about midway through the spring. I set off into a new patch of dense woods. I found that I was on what appeared to be a coyote track. I followed them deep into the trees. It was still fairly cold, and as it got darker under the canopy, it felt below freezing. I was 4 hours into the hike when I noticed something is off. The planet life seemed to be dead and dying now. The birds and bugs are silent, yet still, there's faint tracks that I can still see just ahead, and I want to follow them. Then I stumbled upon it. The coyote. All I see is this black silhouette and the glare of 3 beady eyes. I couldn't believe it. Time stood still. I can't breathe. I darted immediately into a hole in the ground by where it stood. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I ran and run sobbing. I thought it might have been a hallucination, but the eyes bored into my mind. All I can see is those eyes. I suddenly fell straight down into the dirt, exhausted. Everything's aching. The sun was setting. I need to get out. I was absolutely mortified. I made my way again, walking quickly, feeling as though I'm being watched, like an eternity, but soon I make it back to the cabin. Everything ached. I locked every door and the window and closed the blinds. After an hour or so of time has passed, I warm up over some leftover spaghetti. It was pretty terrible tasting, honestly, but before I went up to my bed in the loft, I ate a bowl of ice cream to treat myself for going through the stress that day. I turned off the lights and sat in my bed reading a book with a small little book light. Something felt very wrong, like eyes watching me. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I sat motionless for as long as I could. As I slowly turned my head to the window to look behind me, which had no blinds, I see it. 3 bright eyes shining, standing in the window right outside. It honestly felt as though somebody punched the wind out of my lungs. I hopped over the rail and landed down on the floor. I hit my side when I landed, scrambling into the guest room with no windows and locked the door. I curl up against a wall in the corner, wrapping a blanket around myself. I'd forgotten one thing. The cabin is slightly raised. You can still access under the trap door. The closet in that room. Man, I heard the scratching. It got closer. It honestly felt like it was enveloping over my entire body. From within the closet, I heard it. It climbed up through the door and was about to break out of the closet. I bust the door open, ran through the cabin into the Jeep. I turned the key and wait for the lights to turn on. Now I get this horrible smell like something's rotten. To my left, I see it. Jaws like a snake. I don't know if this is what people describe as a Wendigo, but I didn't take time to look. I drove until my gas was about to run out, and I made it to the closest town. I used up the remaining medical marijuana I had on me to get some rest. And when I woke up the next day as dawn broke, I continued driving all the way back to my folks' place. I put what happened aside, got my own apartment deep in the city, but in my sleep, I see the eyes. Every single night, I wake up sweating and shaking. The doctors say if I don't sleep, I risk serious health issues. Maybe it's just exhaustion-related delirium, but I could swear I heard the scratching outside my window again. I can only hope that it will leave me. Now to this day I don't know who done it or why, but I could have very easily died camping last week. I'm an avid hiker and mountaineer, so I love to be in the outdoors. That all changed though. There was a group of people who were acting suspicious, also hiking on the same trail as me. I thought nothing of them, and went to go and sleep one night, sure I was miles away from them. However, I'm awoken to the sound and smell of things burning. I look up and to my horror, there's a massive blaze around my campfire. These psychopaths have literally tried to set fire to my very own campground. I can see them laughing as I'm sprinting off into the distance, terrified. I called the police and park rangers, and they said they've had a problem with people setting fire to things and they'll launch a full investigation. I still haven't heard anything back yet. The following happened when I was 12. It was the summer of 2003, and I was at my best friend's house for a birthday party who was also turning 12. I remember it was her, myself, and maybe like a handful of other kids around the same age playing at her rather large home, just being kids playing around, playing music and having fun. We were planning on having a slumber party, and we're all really excited to see Austin Powers and Goldmember at the movies. That afternoon, us kids got into my best friend's mum's car and went to a nearby dollar store to pick up a few fun toys to take back to her home. After we had the typical pizza and cake, we decided we got bored staying inside to go outside. My best friend's house is situated right next to a huge golf course, which meant that her backyard was essentially this ginormous golf course. It extended deep into the woods. I distinctly remembered us hanging out on the field, just being silly and playing games where we had to run around inside those sandy groove things of the course, as fast as we could without falling. At this point, the sky turned overcast and a few of us started to complain about getting bored and what we should do next. A few of us were kind of running around, but of course, you can only do that for so long. It started to drizzle, and we decided to remain outdoors since it wasn't raining too heavily. I noticed the other side of our driveway at the house was a cul-de-sac where some new houses are being constructed. So me, being a curious 12-year-old, wanted to go and check it out since it was empty and there were no other cars there, and I saw no workers or trucks or anything. I was checking out the new house when I looked inside the dark, empty space. It was completely isolated until I heard what sounds like whistling. At that point I was entirely alone and wasn't frightened just to listen. It wasn't windy, so I wasn't sure what was causing the whistling. I stood there for maybe another few minutes, just kind of feeling like an adult, kind of stupid. I was only 12, but it felt kind of grown up to be here in the construction area of the woods alone. I was walking around, and it was still raining on me. I almost forgotten until all of a sudden, the whistling returns. Only this time, it's louder, but a lot closer to where I was standing. By now, I was starting to get a little scared, and I walked back to where the rest of the kids are on the golf course. I asked my best friend, since I knew her the most and didn't really know the other kids that well, if she or anyone else whistled after me. She shakes her head and said, "No way. We're playing around on the other side of the course this whole time. We thought you were inside the house or something." So I thought that's really weird, but I shake it off. At this point it was raining, but not hard, and we're all in agreement about hanging out and having fun outside. One of the girls had the bright idea of heading to the woods, which is after the field. So we headed into the woods, and we were kind of playing one of those silly games that doesn't really have an objective or anything, just kind of doing whatever. As I said, I didn't really know most of the other kids too well, but had a fairly good idea of what each of them were wearing. We headed in, and were maybe about 50 feet in when all of a sudden it got freakishly quiet. I'm someone who walks cautiously, so I had my head down for a moment or two, but when I lifted my head up, I can't find anyone. It's the weirdest thing. I stopped in my tracks and tried to gauge the distance from where I thought the original spot was. When I was back with the group, it made little to no difference, because now it was becoming all the more clear that I was totally alone, as if I were picked up and dropped into the woods in the middle of nowhere. And it got dark real quick. Now I'm scared. I've really never experienced anything like this before. I tried calling out to my best friend, but was met by total silence. In fact, it wasn't regular silence, it was almost deafening. The kind that you're not really used to. Well, at least not me. So I got really scared. I had nothing with me to help me find my bearings. Things only escalate when I heard the whistling sound again, and I stood there in silence once again. Instinctively not wanting to crunch on the leaves or break a twig, I didn't want to create a sound or attention my way, so I just want to hear it again, even though it was literally the scariest whistle I've ever heard. I can't really describe it. It sounded definitely human, as though something was missing though. My best attempt to describe it was like, it was there. It knew I was and was getting closer, and darker still. I have tears in my eyes now and I don't know what to do. I finally heard off in the distance some rattling, and one of the kids go, "Why are you over here?" I told her what happened, and she gave me this weird look, like she didn't know how to respond. The others came back, and I decided that unless they ask me a specific question about it, I'm going to keep it to myself. We go back into the field and back to the home. I remember looking over the lights that come from within my best friend's house, and then looking back over the woods from where we just were, and I faintly heard the whistle again. After hanging out a little while watching Sailor Moon videos, it's time to go to the movies. We're really excited, and I remember it was definitely nighttime now. We're all outside now and getting into my best friend's mum's SUV, and myself and maybe like 3 or 4 other girls walked around over to the field. We're maybe 25 feet into the darkness. We're all giggling and being silly, when suddenly, a bright orange light turned on ahead of us. We all scream in unison. Back to the car. Someone said, "What is it?" I tried peering into the darkness ahead, as I made out what appears to be the figure of an old man carrying a lantern or something. We were kind of standing by the car waiting for my friend's mum to come out and for us to go, but we're kind of powerless when he was heading towards us, very slowly. We're all kind of really scared now and didn't know what to do. Thankfully I heard a sound to my right, and it was my friend's mum as she got into the driver's seat. I looked back over at the direction of the lantern, or whatever it was, but it's totally vanished. The rest of the night and slumber party was totally uneventful, and we're asking each other what each of us thought the person was. I'm 27 now, and I sometimes have nightmares about being in those woods again. I really have no explanation for it, and that whistling was the most scary thing that I've ever heard in my life. I guess I should start by saying that this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in the rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance, near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous, lots of open land, plenty of woods and hardly any neighbours. It's what my soul always wanted. I'm also an only child and would have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring toys home. Not just little toys, I'm talking go-karts, buggies and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle. I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride out on the buggies until dark. I forgot to mention that I just moved recently full-time to the property. For years we'd only visit on weekends and not really do as much as we wanted, but now we could do whatever we wanted. It's great, honestly. Now, my parents live about 3 hours away from the land. Seeing them on the weekend is a treat. They bring all kinds of goodies. The land is so beautiful. About 30 acres, more than half of which is cleared. Years ago a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course a pond with tons of frogs. One night, we all get a wild hare and decide to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so my fiance, him and I ride together. Me and my mother decide to ride separate wheelers. These wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they're really easy to ride. And damn, I also forgot to mention that for miles outside the property is a wildlife reservation. So there are miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property, about 20 minutes out, is a creek. Once you pass through it, you will go up the mountains to see the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads, but before you get into the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I've taken this for years and years now. I've had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be with me until I die. Now my dad, fiance, aunt and uncle had gone ahead of us, about 5 minutes or so. My mum and I head out after making a drink. After we pass through the creek and up the mountain, I notice the beams on my mother's wheeler begin to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan is too cool and the engine's kicked on. So I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are 5 houses near the end of the road and near the beginning, so there's about a 5-mile long gap of woods and an occasional dirt trail for a gas as well. And by the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we're supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on when it dies. Now, like I've said, I've been out in these woods my entire life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird feelings or anything. My mum calls my dad to tell him what's going on, but no calls are going through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but the headlights are on. The road is narrow, so narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk idiot flying around the corner and not seeing us. My mum now cries out to my dad again. I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right. There's no power on it. But no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be caused by a lot of things. So I get my phone out to text my fiance, letting him know that we're stuck in the middle of the road. We're sitting there for a good 10 minutes when all the hairs on my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights to see a man walking from pitch darkness. He had no light and said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got to my dad on the phone, I whispered to her, "Mom, there's a guy walking up to us." My mum tends to panic at times, and I never took my eyes off of him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out many features. My mum is freaking out, and I tell her to leave her stuff and jump on my wheeler, and she does so, and I tell the guy that's obviously getting closer, "Hello? What the hell?" He says nothing. That freaks me out. Like, who the hell walks down on a pitch black road in the middle of the night without a light? And not to say something as you approach strangers. And that's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy here, so he probably knew we were women. Normally I keep a 38 on me, but I left it at home. Of all times, why? I start my wheeler up and my mum hops on. The man's getting closer now. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans. Dark but not much hair, and he had a gun. Not in his hand, but on his hip, and visible. He still won't say a word to us, which makes me kinda panic even more. He's also not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realise I can't back up because I can't see a thing behind us, so I throw it in higher and take off past him. As we pass him though, he just stood there, facing and following our direction yet never looking at us. It's pretty disturbing. We make it damn near to the creek and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us yelling. He was on a 4-wheeler and could arrive in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy's still there, on his own wheeler. My mum and I just sat there staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mum eye contact. I'm really getting freaked out now, and we all end up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad says, "Where did he come from?" I told him the darkness. He just walked up without a light from the road. My fiance chimes in, he had a wheeler and toe straps. You all didn't think about this, did you? You all didn't talk to him or anything? My mum and I just stare at each other with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed any help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't pass any driveway. The next day, me and my fiance head to the same spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about where the wheeler died, and just a few hundred yards down the road is an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind in the woods was a rundown barn. It's more of a cabin with no power, no vehicles and signs of recent life, and definitely no signs of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed a man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I look at my fiance, who has a scared look in his face. Inside the barn was stuff you'd expect to see in a garage. No indication of human life. As we backed away slowly, I noticed there's a van hidden in the woods around the homestead. Now I'm pretty sure it didn't work, but still. And that's when my fiance grabs my hand and we quickly go back to the Jeep. On the way home I told him about the vans. He said he saw them too. He notices them at the same time he sees a man staring at him from inside the barn. You must always bring protection when you go to the middle of nowhere. When I was 15, me and my friends went to a large forest near where we all lived. We're just playing deep into the night, but it's still light outside because it's summer. As we're playing, we hear weird chants in the background in another language. It sounds very creepy, almost like church calls. We all look over a hill, and there we see a group of what I can only describe as occultists, with fires forming a star and a circle around that. I wish I could have said that I was brave and stayed for longer, but all of us sprinted away from there, and 30 years later it's still the most terrifying thing to ever have happened to me. Hello everyone, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who sent me stories. I really enjoyed reading them and look forward to the rest to come. So if you have a story you'd like me to narrate, then feel free to send it to my email. Like I said at the start, I will be making a Reddit page soon, just for that, and I'm just setting it up at the minute. And I'm also going to have my podcasts online soon. I'm just sorting some things out with iTunes, but it's on its way. I hope you're all having a great day. And I hope you like my new channel art too. This is my new profile pic. I've got more artwork coming. I want to say a big thank you to Man TV too, who did this artwork. He's really a great guy. So with that out of the way, hope you're all doing great and I'll speak to you all soon.